Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Arab Organization for Human Rights in the UK, I would like to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. And we are pleased to welcome those of you who have been able to attend and to make it and to contribute to this webinar under the title, Halting the Arming of Israeli Occupation, UK's Partial Suspension as a Step but Not Enough. First of all, let me remind you of today's key points of discussion. First, the implications of the UK's partial suspension of arms sales to Israel and why this is a necessary but inadequate step. Two, the urgent need for other countries that provide military support to Israel to follow suit and halt their arms export. Three, the role of international law in ensuring the arms are not used to commit human rights violations. For the continued escalation of the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza and the moral and legal responsibilities of the global community. And lastly, the threats and pressures faced by the UK from countries such as the United States in response to this decision, the previous one. Before we get started, I would like to introduce our speakers for today. Some of them are here, some of them are not here yet. And we'll start with Ms. Kirsten Bass, Senior Campaigner at CAAT, Mr. Michel Piras, and excuse me if I can pronounce the names correctly, European President of the League of Parliamentarians for Palestine, Professor Hayim Rashid, Jewish historian and filmmaker, Mr. Craig Murray, British former diplomat, Mr. Stefano Apuzzo, former member of Italian Parliament, and Mr. Howard Lee Chuan, member of the Malaysian Parliament, and lastly, Mr. Mohammed Jamil, AOHR in the UK's chairman. I will explain the presentation format. Each speaker will have 4 to 5 minutes to present his point of view and insights, and after all the speakers have finished their words and presentation, if time permits, we will have a discussion lasting no more than 20 minutes. During this session, speakers can comment, can add their thoughts and documents on other speakers' contributions. At the end of the webinar, each speaker will have 1 minute to provide final words and conclusion messages. Thank you very much, and let's start right away. And I'll give the floor to Ms. Kirsten Bass, Senior Campaigner at CAAT. Ms. Kirsten, please.
Well, thank you, Nader, and thank you for everybody for joining us today. We're very grateful to be here. I think the first thing to say about UK arms exports to Israel is they're part of a wider picture. Israel receives something like $3.8 billion worth of US military aid each year, and most of that has been used to purchase US military systems, especially military aircraft, things like the F-35, things like the aircraft like the F-16. So the UK's role in terms of arming Israel is very much around the provision of components that are being used to kind of both build those pieces of equipment via the US or via other locations, but also to maintain them and keep them in the air. So the UK has I would argue, a pivotal role in some of the aircraft systems that Israel uses, particularly the F-35, which is a warplane that is built by Lockheed Martin, but which the UK builds something like 15% of. So this embargo, if you like, the blocking of these 30-odd licenses is important from that perspective, because in some ways it signals that the UK disapproves of Israel. It says that it sees there's a risk of a breach of international humanitarian law. And for your listeners, what that really means is there's a risk that this kind of equipment will be used to bomb schools, hospitals, places of work, family homes, and refugee centers, which I think we've all seen. So at one level, it's good, and they've also admitted that that UK components are going to helicopters, going to drones, they're going to military aircraft that Israel is using. So from that perspective, again, it's also good that the UK has admitted its role in what I think most people would call a genocide in Gaza, and that it's trying to do something about it. I guess what our concern is the main thrust of UK arms exports to Israel are the parts for the F-35 aircraft. And this aircraft, we've all the way through Campaign Against Arms Trade has said it's being used against civilians. And just before David Lammy put out his announcement, there was this kind of final proof, if you like, that an F-35 had been used to kill something like 90 people in al-Mawazi's supposed safe zone, which, by the way, is obviously, in the news again today, using 2,000-pound bombs. So the idea that the UK can stop some of its arms exports because it thinks that they'll be used to bomb schools and hospitals, but this particular chunk of its exports should be, if you like, protected and just continued, I think is an untenable position. And I think we were really disappointed to see that this arms export is going on. The other thing I wanted to say was that this is also in the context, the Israelis like to present this as a thing that started in October, of last year. That before October 7th, everything was fine, and suddenly the attack came out of the blue. I think we need to understand that Western arms exports have been supporting the occupation of the West Bank and an apartheid system, and that's been ruled against by the ICJ most recently, and really, we as a country here in the UK should also be taking a look at exports that drive the occupation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and be putting a block on that. And that's what international law demands of us. So I think, in summary, let's look at this thing as a welcome admission, a thing to start. But it's come in after a year of mass casualties, and it's covering a really small proportion of UK weaponry, and it will not have, unfortunately, the effect that I think all of us would like. So hopefully that gives us a bit of a start. Thank you.
Uh, thank you, Ms. Kirsten. But I have one question here about this. Uh, uh, I mean, what is the point behind this kind of ban on British arms export to Israel? Is it something symbolic? Is it something a result of the international pressure? As you said, also that it comes very late, almost 1 year after this genocide is being there. So, do you think what is the real reason behind this, and if it's going to be followed by other procedures, or it's just something just to show that they care about what's going on?
Well, I would say, and we've said this to our supporters, that it's a result of, I feel like, a lot of pressure from the pro-Palestine movement, from people who care about human rights and human dignity in Palestine and elsewhere. So, I think what's happened is the government has been forced to move some way. So, in some ways, it's the government responding to that public pressure. But I think it is arguably the minimum they could do and still claim to be, in some way reflecting human rights law, international humanitarian law. So I think that's what it is. It's trying to show that they're responding to the pressure. And I think it's really interesting that some of the things they're blocking are, should we say, key arguments that the campaign movement has made. Supply of drone parts, for example. That's been a real focus of campaign issues. For example, the direct shipments to Israel are kind of being blocked, although you can ship them via the United States. But again, those kind of horrible flights that I think have been spoken about, going via Akrotiri and flying directly to Israel. Some of those exports, again, I think have been blocked. So they've, if you like, tried to pick some of the main kind of arguments and tried to neutralize them with a partial ban, but they've left a massive loophole that is really just going to mean that UK arms exports will continue to be used in this dreadful situation, unfortunately.
And lastly, the timing. Do you think it has any significance?
I think it's a function of the recent election in the UK. I mean, for people who are watching from the United States, the UK had a general election last month. Sorry, in July, and so we've got a new UK government, and I think it reflects the fact that there were I'm going to say 5 MPs that were elected in seats that you'd expect to have gone to the governing party, the Labour Party, uh, primarily on the issue of Palestine. And there were several others, including, dare I say it, as quite a strong challenge from our friend Andrew Feinstein in Keir Starmer's own seat, where I think, again, what they've shown is the electoral potency of the Palestine issue directly in terms of people voting or not voting for the governing party. So I think that's why they really felt that they needed to respond. I think the other thing to say as well is that David Lammy, who's the new British Foreign Secretary, spoke a lot before he came into office about publishing the legal guidance that was given to the government on arms sales to Israel. And so I think, again, from his perspective, he will be if we want to be fair-minded about it, he'll be looking at if you like that guidance, realizing that it had to be published because that's what he asked for. And then, the immediate question is, well, you received this guidance. What are you doing about it? So I think that a lot of that is part of the timing as well. But as I say, the idea that this is a substantial move to block large quantities of arms sales to Israel, unfortunately, I wish that were true, but I think from a practical perspective, I don't think it will have the effect we would like, unfortunately.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, we hope this will be something which will be followed some with the procedures to really stop what's happening in Gaza. Thank you very much, Ms. Kirsten. And now we give the floor to Professor Haim Persheeth, a Jewish historian and filmmaker. Mr. Haim, please.
Thank you. I won't repeat what Kirsten Bays has said because I've agreed with every word. Just to add, Keir Starmer, the UK new Prime Minister, has actually supported the genocide from the beginning by claiming that Israel has a right to defend itself by starvation, denial of medicine and fuel, and of course, bombing. So I don't think that he was in a good situation to defend himself against claims of supporting genocide. Now, the Genocide Convention makes not just the support of arms illegal and chargeable in a sense, but also any other form of support to genocide is also basically enabling genocide. And Keir Starmer has made noises to that effect more than once. So he was in a difficult situation. And of course, once the ICJ has come to a position of in May that the UN asked it to take about the occupation, the government had to do something to prove that it's not supporting genocide actively. And I think this is the minimum, as Kirsten said, that they could get away with. And this is what they have done. Also, to remind the viewers that the two states that supported apartheid in South Africa to the very bitter end and only changed a very short time before the collapse of apartheid were the US and UK. And I think this will happen also in the case of Israel. So what we see is a symbolic move. It doesn't disable the Israelis from doing genocide. They continue to do it. And the fact that the F-35 was accepted from this arrangement allows them to continue with the heavier bombs, which cause most casualties. And they bomb everywhere, especially in the areas that they tell the Palestinians to congregate in and consider as safe. And there is no safe place in Gaza, and there hasn't been ever since the 7th of October. Now, the other thing, of course, is that the UK is not alone. The West as a bloc is supporting Israel in a way which is actually without precedent. I think it's unprecedented that a country is actually conducting genocide in the full light of the world media, and the West is continuing to support it, continuing to actually use the lies that the Israeli army and government are spreading every single day, to the point that even the Israeli army is now saying that it's lied on a number of issues which came out this week. So I think the UK is not alone, but now that the UK is the first country that stopped some arms provided to Israel, is hopefully going to bring change from others. I am not very optimistic, because we've got to look even further to the UN and to the force that is applied to the UN by the UK and by the rest of the and of course by the US mainly. But the US has vetoed every possible sanction that was ever suggested against Israel since 1948. Israel has never had to face sanctions until now. So until the UN itself as an organization is changed, and I think BRICS is now trying to bring this about, but not too fast. And it's a bit, gentle about it, which I regret. They should be much more active and faster. Otherwise, there won't be Palestinians to save in Gaza. And I have to end by saying that it's very troubling that the Arab world has not played a more positive role in stopping the genocide until now. Negotiating a ceasefire, which of course is totally useless with the US supporting Israel every time that it changes moves a goalpost, which Netanyahu is a specialist at. One expects, and I think the Arab people also expect their government to act more actively in stopping the genocide. This has not happened, again because of US, UK, and Western pressure. I think this must change. Without those changes, very deep changes to UN, to the Security Council, to the veto powers, to the unwritten rules that keep key roles in the UN in the hands of Western diplomats and governments, and especially to the negative role that the Security Council has played in actually not stopping not just this genocide, but also others. So the UN is ineffable and ineffectual organization, and this must change if order and international law is to prevail. And at the moment, I don't see any action towards it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hayim, for this contribution. Also, I have just one question about this, of course, the significance of this decision, and also why do you think UK is doing this kind of, I can quote you, the propaganda or just to say to the world that they really care about what's happening in Gaza, and what is the significance of the timing as well?
Well, as I said, I think the move is basically, a presentation rather than a real move to stop the important weapons supplied to Israel. It's symbolic, but it's a move of a new government coming in and playing a new broom. We are going to do what the other government hasn't done. And frankly, the Tory government was so out of touch with reality that it's very easy to look like an active government after Rishi Sunak. But this is not the case. This is, and I think the new government faced both the ICJ that Rishi Sunak didn't face until the election, basically, and also appointed a very senior law person, a legal person who has been an active supporter of some Palestinian rights. And as a result, I think he had to deliver at least this little change in the arms supplies by Britain to Israel. And I think that's what he has managed to do. I hope that he continues to follow the advice of the ICJ, because otherwise, even the Britain has stopped 8% of the arms being supplied. I know it's not the main supplier, but the action is very minimal. So we want to see 100% of the arms supplies, and then we'll see that they're acting. At the moment, they're not really acting. They're just providing themselves with a defense against ICJ accusations.
And do you think that maybe some other countries will follow suit?
There are some noises in Europe, not in the United States, of course. I mean, the power of the Israel lobby and the arms industry lobby, and who work together in the United States and in other contexts, is so strong that the US is not a candidate for change of policy. Whoever actually is elected in November, there will not be any change that I can see. But in Europe, there may well be changes. Ireland, Spain, and even France. I wish I could say Germany. Germany is a very serious, large supplier of arms to Israel. I can't see a change coming there. Maybe Italy may be swayed. Italy is a main supplier to Israel. It may be swayed if another country joined Britain, not in stopping 8%, but stopping arms altogether. I think Italy might follow. I cannot see Germany or the US doing that.
Okay, I think we have to wait and see what is going to happen. And now we thank you very much, Professor Hayim. And now we move to Mr. Craig Murray. Mr. Craig Murray is a British former diplomat, and he will give us his input about what's the meaning of what's happening by UK to ban some of its arms exports to Israel. Mr. Craig?
Thank you. I think we've had two excellent presentations, which I agreed with entirely, and saved me from having to say a lot of what I would have said, and I won't repeat what we've heard. I think the most important thing to say is I think this is a defensive move. And this is a defensive move by government ministers concerned for their own position if they don't do this. They received very strong advice internally from the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office's legal advisors that it would be illegal to continue to grant arms export licenses to Israel when they're probably being used in breach of international humanitarian law. And of course, we can all see they're in breach of international humanitarian law. And I think the first thing to say is that this is not going to stop the genocide in Gaza. You know, the genocide in Gaza is well advanced. It's part of a genocide that's been lasting over 70 years. It's just a more accelerated phase at the moment. And none of this is going to stop Israeli atrocities, unfortunately. And that's true of the entire ICJ process. But what we are seeing is how the ICJ process works through eventually into law in various countries and into legal systems in various countries. Because in 2 or 3 years' time, the ICJ will come up with a definitive ruling that Israel is committing genocide presently. And it's very important to note that complicity in genocide is not only illegal in international law, which of course it is. Complicity in genocide is specifically a crime in UK domestic law. There was a Genocide Act passed in, I think, the 1960s. That was replaced by the International Criminal Court Act in the 2000s. But the International Criminal Court Act makes complicity in genocide a criminal offence in UK domestic law. Once the ICJ rules there has been a genocide, it then puts a minister who has continued to supply arms against his legal advice in a very dangerous position of personal danger of conviction under UK criminal law. They don't worry too much about it. They're not scared of international law as being a case of personal jeopardy to them. They feel a certain amount of impunity there. But if David Cameron, when he was Lord Cameron, when he was foreign minister of the last Conservative government, he ignored the legal advice. He got the same legal advice that was available to David Lammy. He decided to ignore it. I don't see how he's going to avoid prosecution for complicity in genocide once the ICJ rules there has been a genocide. What David Lammy has done is do the absolute minimum that they think might be able to get them off the hook of personal liability for complicity in genocide while still maintaining their support for Israel. And nobody should be in any doubt at all that Keir Starmer and David Lammy are full supporters of this genocide, because they are. Please don't be confused by this token, pretty meaningless measure, which is, as we've heard, only affects 8% of UK arms exports to Israel, doesn't affect the F-35 production, for example. And one reason for that, of course, is that it's not just to support Israel. The calculation will have been within the UK government that if they were to block F-35 components going to the United States, that might prevent Lockheed Martin and the United States from buying UK components for future projects. If the UK were to block American military weapons being used in pursuit of American foreign policy by showing an independent foreign policy agenda, which is something, of course, the UK almost never does. That's why this is so token. But I'm quite certain that messages have been going across to Washington saying, look, we've got to do this for security from our own domestic legislation and for domestic political reasons, but don't worry, we're not actually affecting anything real. This isn't having an effect in the real world. So this is token, this is fake, and at the same time, it's an attempt by ministers to secure their personal position against personal criminal liability.
Mr. Craig, thanks very much. And since you have brought up this issue of domestic legal background of this decision, since it's new to all of us, can you elaborate about this? Do you think they really might have something like, or this decision might be something like a preemptive step before the ICJ might, or not ICJ, maybe domestic law can bring them to court or something?
Well, I don't think anybody has much doubt. From the tenor of all the ICJ rulings lately, from the ICJ ruling on whether or not to take the case in South Africa against Israel, to the entire tone of the ICJ remarks in their ruling on the status of the occupied territories, where they basically completely sank the Western defense that normal international law has been modified by the Oslo Accords, and therefore the status of the occupied territories is somehow in doubt and not entirely illegal. The ICJ completely demolished that argument. So I personally, I've no doubt that the ICJ will find genocide in 2 or 3 years' time. We'll find Israel is currently committing genocide. When that happens, if the ICJ says this is genocide, then this is genocide. UK courts will not say it wasn't a genocide if the ICJ said it was. No UK court is going to contradict that. So then the question of complicity in that genocide becomes a very real legal question. And politicians will feel, of course, they have impunity because it's a politician who is the Attorney General. It is politicians who run the country. But nonetheless, I see it's going to be very, very difficult once the ICJ says this was a genocide for certainly the previous Conservative government to argue it was not complicit in the genocide. And very difficult for Keir Starmer to argue he was not complicit in the genocide. And we've had referred to, of course, all the things he said about Israel's right to cut off water, its right to cut off food, and the fact that they're continuing to go with the vast majority of arms exports to Israel at a time this is continuing. So they may feel that they are powerful, they are in charge, the rule of law will not really work, and they have impunity. But they will have the doubt at the back of their mind. And the important thing is the government's own legal advisors are advising them that it would be illegal to continue. And my understanding is that the distinction that they have tried to make between some parts and other parts, and David Lammy initially in public tried to justify that as a distinction between defensive weapons and offensive weapons. So there's no rational sense in which an F-35 is a defensive weapon and not an offensive weapon, particularly the way it's being used in Gaza. And in the end, they didn't rely on that in what they've published. But their attempt to find some nationalization, some justification, some fig leaf, just to secure their legal position is what we are seeing here. And it is not political, it is much more legal. Yes, it does to some extent appease the pro-Palestinian sentiment for them to be seen to be doing something, but that's not really what this is about, because it's tiny, it doesn't go very far. And there's no doubt at all that Lammy and Starmer are both ardent Zionists. They're both members of Labour Friends of Israel.
Yeah, we understand. Well, but hope you gave us some more like dimension for behind this decision, and we will see which one will prevail. Thank you very much, Mr. Craig Murray, for your contribution. And now we have Mr. Stefano Apposo, who's supposed to be with us here tonight for his contribution, but actually he had some commitments and he apologizes. And at the same time, he recorded a message for us. Mr. Apposo is a former member of Italian Parliament, and we can now listen to his message. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Bentrovate a tutte e a tutti, mi presento, sono Stefano Apuzzo, giornalista, scrittore, docente di storia alle scuole superiori ed ex parlamentare dei Verdi al Parlamento italiano. Sono onorato di questo invito che mi è stato rivolto e vi ringrazio sinceramente. L'interruzione della vendita di armi a Israele da parte del Regno Unito è sicuramente una buona notizia. Non è sufficiente ovviamente, e il timore che ho è che vada a finire un po' come l'Italia, nel senso che anche il governo di destra italiano, filo israeliano, ha affermato di aver sospeso l'invio e la vendita di armi a Israele, però c'erano delle partite vecchie che dovevano partire e che sono comunque partite, che stanno partendo, quindi diciamo che cambia poco. L'Inghilterra ha delle responsabilità storiche enormi in Medio Oriente e in Palestina. Dalla dichiarazione di Balfour del 1917 alla agevolazione dell'immigrazione sionista ebraica in terra di Palestina, fino all'abbandono del mandato sulla Palestina e alla cessione armi e bagagli della terra di Palestina ai sionisti e ai coloni che poi avrebbero costituito lo Stato di Israele. Non solo storiche, ovviamente, nel senso che gli inglesi sono all'allaccio e al seguito degli americani, degli statunitensi su tutta la politica estera. Adesso c'è un governo laburista, speriamo che sia meno incline a sostenere con le proprie armi, con la propria diplomazia, il genocidio in corso a Gaza e in West Bank. Il supporto politico diplomatico
I think the screen is
e
paused
militare
or it's gone fine. Okay.
a Israele da parte dei paesi occidentali è una vergogna che i paesi riconoscono Israele. Gli israeliani non hanno nulla di autoctono, si vede, sono alti, biondi.
I think we have some problem with the video, and we will start sharing the screen again. Let's listen.
Tutto da dimostrare, anzi, gli storici, gli studiosi e gli archeologi hanno dimostrato che il cosiddetto grande regno di Israele non è mai esistito, sicuramente non nelle dimensioni bibliche come ci è stato venduto, ecco. E quindi i paesi occidentali riconoscono una propria colonia, riconoscono gli israeliani come propri coloni, come provenienti dai paesi occidentali, dall'America, dall'Europa e dalla Russia, e per questo c'è questa grande solidarietà, questo riconoscersi fra uguali. D'altronde, ad esempio, gli Stati Uniti e Israele condividono la nascita e la propria ricchezza. Gli Stati Uniti sono nati sul genocidio dei nativi americani, sterminando interi popoli nativi americani, e sono cresciuti, si sono arricchiti, hanno proliferato grazie allo schiavismo, grazie alla rapina di quel paese. Gli israeliani, Israele nasce con la Nakba, cacciando i palestinesi, e da allora la politica israeliana non è mai cambiata, nel senso che ancora da allora hanno espulso i palestinesi, fatto pulizia etnica, allontanati i civili palestinesi con bombe, terrore, stupri nei villaggi, e ad oggi a Gaza e in West Bank stiamo assistendo allo stesso indecoroso spettacolo, con la complicità o, nel migliore dei casi, il silenzio della cosiddetta comunità internazionale, che non trova nulla da eccepire, nulla da dire. A Israele si rimprovera qualcosina, ma anche gli Stati Uniti bacchettano Netanyahu, bacchettano Israele, richiamano all'ordine, ma le armi continuano ad arrivare dall'Italia, le armi di Leonardo, delle grandi aziende italiane, di Otto Melara, le bombe che stanno massacrando i civili palestinesi, le donne e i bambini, sono anche di origine italiana, europea, oltre che americana. Gli americani mandano bombe da 500.000 libre, che sono delle bombe che distruggono non un palazzo, ma un quartiere intero. Il tutto nel silenzio della comunità internazionale. Quindi la legalità internazionale funziona, deve essere rispettata a fasi alterne, cioè nei confronti della Russia che aggredisce l'Ucraina, ma non nei confronti di Israele che sta compiendo un genocidio. Tra l'altro si parla di 40.000 morti. Beh, in realtà una rivista che non è proprio l'house organ di Hamas, Lancet, parla, in base a dei calcoli un po' più credibili e scientifici, di 180.000 morti. Dopo lo sterminio degli armeni e l'olocausto, nel mondo cosiddetto civile non si era mai assistito a nulla di simile a ciò che sta accadendo a Gaza. Una distruzione così totale, un massacro così indiscriminato, dove l'80% delle vittime, se non di più, sono donne e bambini, la dicono lunga sulle reali intenzioni di Israele e degli americani. Fare una pulizia etnica totale per avere tutto lo spazio e tutta la terra di Palestina, di quella che fu la Palestina storica, a disposizione per i coloni. Gli USA potrebbero fare qualcosina di più. Ad esempio, uno Stato che vuole fermare il genocidio, beh, interrompe la vendita di armi o le donazioni. C'è da ricordare che il sistema Iron Drone a Israele l'hanno pagato gli americani, c'è da ricordare che il muro dell'apartheid che ruba le migliori terre dei palestinesi in West Bank e che divide famiglie e villaggi fra villaggi in Palestina è stato pagato dagli americani. Allora, se gli americani e gli europei continuano a sostenere in questo modo Israele, è chiaro che qualche problema c'è, ma qualche problema possiamo darlo anche noi con il boicottaggio. Le aziende che sostengono Israele, le aziende israeliane e i prodotti che arrivano dai territori occupati adesso hanno altre etichettature per confondere i consumatori. Questo vuol dire che la campagna boicotta, disinvesti e sanziona sta funzionando. La campagna BDS, nata in Palestina ed estesasi a tutto il mondo, sta funzionando. Ci sono aziende che stanno perdendo milioni, parlo del tè Lipton, McDonald's, piuttosto che altre aziende che sostengono Israele e quindi il genocidio in corso, accusano gravi perdite dal punto di vista economico, e quindi quella è una via. E poi far sapere, la vera arma è far sapere al mondo cosa sta succedendo. E qui ci stanno aiutando i giovani palestinesi, le giovani palestinesi e i giornalisti che con coraggio, ne sono già stati massacrati più di 150 da Israele in West Bank e a Gaza, far sapere al mondo cosa sta davvero succedendo. Vi ringrazio tantissimo.
Yeah, would like to thank Mr. Apuzzo for his contribution and his care for speaking to us today, even though he was so busy. And now we want just to pose some question and a discussion. And I would like to start with Ms. Kirsten Bays. Ms. Kirsten, I have some questions for you. And one question is, given your extensive experience in campaigning against arms trade, what specific action should be taken by grassroots movements and organizations like yours, CAAT, to pressure governments into fully halting arms export to Israel, especially in light of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza?
Well, I think the first thing to say is from the perspective of an ordinary person, it can be really hard to work out what to do. I think most of us have seen the images and some of the terrible situations that have happened in Gaza, and also I'm going to say the West Bank and East Jerusalem as well. So the first thing to say is anything that people choose to do is a good thing, and you know, whether that's writing to their MP, whether that's picketing a local arms company, whether it's sitting in the road to stop an arms shipment reaching a port, you know, all of these things have been what people do. You know, whatever people have the energy and the ability to do, I think is you know, it all contributes. It all helps. I think the second thing to say is that, you know, a number of the people that have taken direct action, you know, to try and stop the arms shipments, They've been arrested under terrorism legislation and have been, brought before the courts under those sorts of charges. And again, I'd absolutely condemn that. I think if a genocide is happening, we all have a duty to try and prevent it. And not everybody can get onto a roof of an arms factory and start throwing the tiles down. Not everybody can do that. But I think whatever people can do, I think that is good. And people are accountable for their actions, but also it's in the context of a terrible death. We've seen 40,000 people killed, and that pushes this genocide, this massacre into the top drawer of some of the most horrible things we've seen. So all of that's true. So I think we've probably got three things that we can do as people. I think the first thing to say is governments are doing this on our behalf. They're licensing these weapons. They're promoting these weapons to Israel. They're buying weapons from Israel that have been used against Palestinian people. And we as citizens have a right to contact our MPs and our government ministers to, tell them not to make our voices heard. There are something like, I'm going to say 300 new Labour MPs, many of whom have not engaged with the Palestine issue before. And so, we need to kind of go in there and kind of make it clear that this is a priority. So that is a thing that we can, that any of us can do. I think definitely join the protests at your local arms companies. They're happening all the time. There's regular ones up and down the country. We tend to let people know about them. Follow them on social media, follow them on Twitter and Facebook, work out where your local arms company is. We have maps that will help you do it, help you find people who are involved in the genocide. And you know what? Go down and talk to the people going in. That is, talk to the people going past. Tell the people that are driving past these arms factories that the people who are working there are contributing to a genocide. Let people know, because we all know that this is happening and we are, massively engaged with it. But I can guarantee you can be talking to people in the street and they really don't know enough about it. A lot of it's kept very quiet, kept very subdued. So if we don't talk about it, we can't rely on the press or the government to really talk about it. So I think that's the second thing to say. And I think the third thing to say is, there are people who are, as I say, taking direct action. There are people who are facing court cases. There are people who are bringing court cases against the government. I think support the people who are doing the thing. If it's a legal case, you support it. If it's a case where somebody is up in court for trying to resist, go down and show your support to them. Whatever you feel you can do. If you can't be on outside an arms company, if you can't be on top of a roof, or if you can't be a lawyer making a really good case, you can at least support the people who are and cheer them on. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, thank you very much. We hope everybody will do what you have said now. And moving to another question for Mr. Craig Murray. Mr. Craig, I have a question for you as a former diplomat. The question is, what do you see as the most effective diplomatic and legal avenues available to challenge and hold accountable countries that continue to provide military support to Israel despite ongoing violations of international law?
I think activists need within their own country to look at the legal regime within their own country and take action against their own governments. I think that's extremely important. And you'll find, for example, the United States government is not allowed by law to supply arms to countries which commit human rights abuses, but has continued to do so. And I don't think there's much chance of stopping it in the States. But in many European countries, there may be possibilities for legal action which can be effective. So certainly activist groups and campaigning groups need to look at the legal avenues. In terms of diplomatic pressure, I think what we have to move towards is that there are mechanisms by which the General Assembly can suspend Israel from membership of the United Nations. And I think that's something which we now need to be quite seriously working on. I don't think it will happen at this General Assembly, but this General Assembly will certainly provide the forum on which serious lobbying for that to happen needs to be done. But that requires the countries of the global south to get very serious about it. And I'd like to take on what Professor Haim was saying earlier, that the attitude of Arab states has been extremely disappointing throughout this genocide. We know that many of these Arab states are client states of the United States, in which sometimes the regimes are dependent on American and even Israeli security services for protection against their own populations, and to keep their own populations in place. And that partly explains it. But it's also to do with deliberate Western exploitation and enhancement and amplification of sectarian divide. And, you know, when you see countries which were trying to help the Palestinians, when you see Iran and the Houthis and others attacking Israel with missiles, and then you see Arab states actually shooting down the missiles on the Israelis' behalf, then something has gone very, very wrong in the Middle East. And I think we have to be very honest and upfront about this. You know, I don't think we have to be scared to discuss it. We have to say, this is truly appalling. But the use of Sunni Shia sectarianism to drive support for Israel in the Arab states, in effect, military support even, and security service support, is a real problem that has to be tackled. And unless we look at some of these fundamental questions, we're never going to solve this problem.
Thank you very much, Mr. Craig. And next question for Professor Haim. Professor Haim, in your presentation, you mentioned the negative role of the Arab world in addressing the genocide. Can you elaborate on what you believe are the main failures of Arab governments in this context, and what needs to change or to be changed to shift their approach to the Palestinian cause?
Well, we all know that the Arab regimes faced a real challenge from the populations, more or less everywhere in the Arab world, in 2011. And it hasn't succeeded anywhere. The Arab people, we were told, don't want democracy. This is what the West is telling us. The Arab people actually do want democracy. And they do want government to support Palestine, and they do want government that support justice, not just in Palestine, but everywhere in the Arab world. This was very clear in 2011, in the following years. So this is an unfinished revolution in the Arab world, and I think we will see it continuing. At the moment, for example, in Egypt, there is such control of the opposition that they can't speak. The same is true in Jordan, the same is true in the Gulf. So this is a situation that cannot continue. It's not just for the Palestinians is this a very bad result, but actually for the Arab people in general. And I think Israel and the United States have used it quite a lot. And I wanted to add something that I can say as an academic is very important in order to bring Israel to justice. Kirsten has given us an amazing list of actions that we should take. Now, all of us, or most of us, are members of unions. The unions have very interesting and progressive positions on, against Zionism and against the settler colonial state in Israel, but hardly any union is actually taking action on it. Unite, for example, a very large union, if not the largest, has got a very progressive policy against Zionism, but is doing nothing because the leadership and its leader is stopping such actions from. So I think all of us need to put pressure on our unions. And I think people in Arab countries also do that. And we should learn from them. People in Palestine have done this, and they're trying to use the unions to put pressure on the PA in Palestine to stop actually working for Israel's security rather than the security of the Palestinians. So union and unionism is very important. The other thing is this. I know we talked about the supply of arms, but actually Europe and the United States support Israel in one very important way, which as an academic is very important to me, and that is the huge sums of money out of all proportions that Israel is getting for research, which is mainly defense research. Defense is nonsense, of course. It's not defense, it's offense. It's offensive. So Europe is actually financing military research in Israel in most Israeli universities, if not all. There are billions of euros going to Israel every year, more than some of the membership states of the EU. Israel is getting more research funding from the EU than at least a third of its own members. This is nonsensical. This is mad and should be stopped. Europe should not support Israeli military research. But we've got to publish this everywhere we can, so this will stop. And the other thing, of course, is Europe is supporting those Arab countries that are trying to normalize relations with Israel. And so do the Americans. So we've got to act in Europe. I'm not talking about America because I don't live in America, but I consider myself living in Europe, even though we're not members of the EU anymore. In Europe, we have to act to stop our governments from supporting Arab regimes that are actually breaking human rights of their own citizens and are not supporting the Palestinians, even actively supporting Israel in its apartheid and its genocide. Anything we can do there, I think, would be very valuable.
Thank you very much, Professor Haim. And I want to raise an issue now, a question. Is recently, of course, you know, the Turkish activist, U.S. Turkish activist Ayşe Nur was killed by Israeli forces in the West Bank. And it's likely that the weapons used came from the West, possibly even from her own country, the United States. Do you believe such incidents where foreign nationals are victims as well could impose a shift in international policy or pressure governments to reconsider their arms sales to Israel, especially if you think that this would make a difference? I mean, the West gave Israel the green light, or the West gave Israel the green light to kill, even if their own national, their own victims. Do you
Well,
think, I mean, this will affect, I mean, the question is for everybody.
Well, if I can maybe jump in, we obviously saw the killing of 3 British aid workers, I think earlier this year, earlier in 2024, which again was connected to UK made technology, drone technology, as it happened. And I think what I would say is that it did spark a very heated news cycle and very loud debate on the issue. I think the thing that I found very painful, though, to see was, these were 3 British aid workers who were obviously trying to do a good thing to help Palestinian people. But of course, by that point, something like 100 Palestinian aid workers had already been killed in the bombing, and you run the risk of by highlighting sort of Western casualties, you run the risk of, if you like, erasing or forgetting those who from the Palestine and from Gaza who'd borne the brunt of this. So I think it's potentially useful. I think it's a thing to talk about and to highlight. But I think we as campaigners need to put it in, always go back to they call it ABC, Acknowledge Bridge Campaign. You know, acknowledge that, you know, this loss of life, the loss of life of any person is terrible. You know, absolutely tell the story of this lady from Turkey, or an American lady from Turkey, or of the aid workers. You know, make that connection. But I think we then need to turn that lens, take the lens that the press have put in it, and say, look, turn your lens around and look at Gaza, look at West Bank, look at East Jerusalem. You know, the people there, you know, have been suffering, and you know, we need to care about each life, not just the Western lives.
Thank you. And Ms. Haim, do you have any comment?
Yeah, I think first of all, we shouldn't use the numbers that are released in Gaza as the accurate numbers of people killed. The Lancet has made that argument in the spring, and it took the Guardian almost 6 months to make the same point. So we shouldn't wait for the BBC and the Guardians. We should read those outlets that come up with the news, because, of course, one of the ways of submission that our governments are using is actually the media. The silencing of a critique of Israel in the BBC is unheard of. It's, you know, at the same time that, of course, they wouldn't dream of doing this to news about Russia. Yeah, we hear about Russia all the time. Even there are many lies, but the lies of Israel are actually everywhere on the media, on the mainstream media. So we should actually act against our media when they don't actually do the job, which we pay for in the case of the BBC. They're not doing the job of informing us. They are doing the job of Israel by actually sharing propaganda. So that's very important. And of course, the numbers of people dead are, according to the article in the Lancet, probably 10 times as high as the numbers now given. So between 400,000 and 560,000 people have died in Gaza. Just think about that. You know, almost 100,000 tons of bombs have been dropped on Gaza. This is twice as much as what the Nazis had dropped on Britain in the whole Second World War. Think about this. This is a small area, size of, you know, Haringey, or, you know, this is a very small area. In this small area live people that even before the 7th of October could hardly stay alive. The Israelis, even before the 7th of October, did not allow enough food, enough water, enough fuel, enough medications into Gaza. So after the 7th of October, this is a campaign of genocide, which is not just with bombs. It's a campaign of genocide with food, with every way. For example, I'm an academic. I want all academics to know that there was a genocidal work against academia. Every single university was destroyed in Gaza. 150 professors were killed. They're not actually fighting Israel. They're actually fighting for knowledge in Palestine. Palestine is a very exceedingly well-educated nation. And look what happens. They are fighting the universities, they're fighting the hospitals, they're fighting the mosques, they're fighting community centers, they're fighting the water. So I think we need, as academics, for example, to totally cut links, any links, with the apartheid regime in Israel. There is no place where an academic can go to Israel for a conference, can invite people from Israel to a conference, can agree to do research together with Israelis. So there are many avenues that we haven't started even using to stop this madness. And to end up, I want to say this, of course, and I think Kirsten made the point very eloquently. Yes, some people from the West have died, and this is terrible. And, people relate to it immediately in the way that they don't relate to children and babies and men and women killed in Gaza because they are Palestinian Arabs. How terrible is that? That because of we also share imperial apartheid in the history that our friend from Italy is, exposed. We don't treat the life on the same level that we should. An American, someone from Turkey, the people from the World Kitchens, World Kitchen Center, etc. Why? Everyone is a human being, right? So let's treat them in the same way. Let's use those death of Westerns to point out that on the same day, hundreds and thousands of other people have died and no one is speaking about them. We've got to end this, and our media is helping this to continue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haim. And Mr. Craig, do you think that the West really is giving a green light to Israel to just do whatever they want, and they can't be held accountable, even shooting the national of the West itself on the US as well, and they can feel or can enjoy impunity afterwards?
Well, I think we've seen this for years. You can Rachel Corrie is one name that, of course, comes to mind. And there have been others over the years, and Israel has never been held accountable. I'm reminded, in my very first job as a diplomat, I was on the South Africa desk in the 1980s in the Foreign Office. And there, one of the things that used to infuriate me, and I used to try to get the policy changed, was that the United Kingdom accepted as legitimate the internal legal process of apartheid South Africa. So there would be apartheid, anti-apartheid activists, trade unionists and others in South African prisons. And I would be arguing we should try to get them out of prison, and the reply would come, no, they were correctly convicted in a court of law. And we accepted the South African justice system as a genuine justice system. And we would accept, under the Thatcher government at the time, the United Kingdom would accept the South African report on things like the Sharpeville massacre as genuinely what happened. And that's what we're seeing now. Whenever anything happens, the UK and the US say, oh, well, we'll wait for the Israeli internal investigation. Then the Israeli internal investigation will either say it was an accident, or it was a mistake, or it was a Hamas bullet gone astray, or that, okay, we did this and somebody has been mildly disciplined at a low level, and that's the end of it. And unless you delegitimize the apartheid state of Israel as a state completely, and say that we just do not accept the institutions of this state are of a standard that the world can live with. But we are not going to accept any internal Israeli justice procedures or military procedures because this is apartheid, and there's a duty not to recognize apartheid or cooperate with it. Unless the West takes that stance, they will never do anything on these kind of killings. And the signs are, they're just not there yet. The UK and the US, exactly as with South Africa, are standing firmly behind Israel. And sadly, unlike with South Africa, at the moment, nearly all of the Western countries are also standing behind Israel in that way.
I see. Thank you, Craig, because I was raising this question because I think nobody could ever even imagine that the West will keep silent when they are confronted by their own nationals being killed by Israel intentionally, especially in the West Bank. I mean, they also can see what they are shooting at. And this degree of what they are ignoring what's happening in the West Bank, I think something is unprecedented. Anyways, thank you very much for your contributions for today. And at the end of this valuable webinar, I would like to thank everyone who has taken part in either by speaking, commenting, or listening. Thank you very much for your time and input. And till we meet again, let's say goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you, and all the best.